Hi guys, it's Erin from Florals. Today, as beautiful as the sky looks outside, it is frigid. So we're gonna spend a little bit of time here in the greenhouse and talk about woodies. Now, I've had a few of you guys ask some specifics on what woodies are and how I use them in bouquets and what types I use. So we're gonna talk about all that, and I'll give you a list of the woodies that I grow here that you may want to try. What a woody is in flower terms is a woody is any kind of tree or shrub or really a vine, like perennial vines like raspberries that you will cut from for either foliage, flowers, or even the berries that come later on in the season. These make a lot of these make fantastic foliages. They make really beautiful flowers, and then a good amount of them will give you fall interest. So it's an all-season sort of impact that these plants have. Now, there's a couple things to remember. Shrubs and trees and whatnot, they're obviously more expensive than just buying seeds. So it's an upfront investment in your garden landscape or your flower farm or cutting garden, but over time it will certainly make up for that investment in that you only have to plant them once and you don't have to do all the constant, the yearly care and restarting, buying seeds every year. You don't have to have grow lights or heat mats or any of that stuff. They live out in your garden and you cut from them and they're fantastic. So the first one on my list is ninebark. This is an absolute classic. I have several different varieties, but Diablo is one of the better ones. It's a dark burgundy sort of color. But the Western Pacific green ninebark grows native here. It's wild. You can actually find it out in the woods. But I've potted up and grown. I have some that I have grown specifically for the cutting garden, so I don't have to go foraging out in the forest for them. But the thing about ninebark is that you can cut them several times during the year. In the spring, when it's blooming, they have these big panicle type blooms. The blooms don't last very long, but the shape is really pretty. You can cut them when it's just the foliage, and then you can cut them after they've created little seed heads on all of those flowering stems. They're really beautiful, and they come in a wide range of colors, everywhere from like a chartreusey green through, just regular sort of grass green, all the way to a deep burgundy color, and they're just so good. And I cut them all season long, mostly just for foliage, but I have quite a few of them out there, and they're really, really handy for foliage in your bouquets. The next one I want to talk about is hydrangeas. They're a classic woody. In our climate, we can pretty much grow just about any kind of hydrangea. Some places, if you're super hot and dry, you have a harder time with some of the arborescens, I guess, the mop head, or especially if you want them to have blue flowers. Depending on your soil pH and all that, you may struggle to get certain types, but here, they all love it here. We get enough sun, we get enough rain, we don't get super hot usually, so they're pretty happy here. I have several different old varieties of just the arborescents. I have a couple of lace caps, which are really pretty, and then the classic limelight, the panicle type hydrangea that is just, it's a staple in a lot of cutting gardens now, and they're fantastic. And if you catch them, even if you don't cut all the blooms during the season, if you catch them before they get wind or rain worn in the fall, they make fantastic dried flowers. They turn from that limey green color to a sort of a raspberry pink, and you can cut them then and dry them, and they're fantastic. So hydrangea, highly recommend if your climate can handle it. Sometimes even if you live in a hot and dry place, you can grow them in the shade, and they're really great as soon as they start blooming all the way up until the fall. Another one that I grow here that I adore is Forsythia. It's not one that a lot of people think of when you're looking for woody shrubs to grow for cut flowers and arranging, but they are fantastic in the early spring. You can cut them and force the blooms on them, those bright yellow flowers. You can let them bloom and cut from them, or they also make really good foliage plants later on in the season. And they will, most varieties will be absolutely covered in blooms, and then they grow and spread very, very robustly. They're great flower plants to have, and I have a whole bunch of them around. A lot of what I grow is just part of my landscape over the years, but we've got a new project going on that's really exciting. On the north end of the field, John's clearing a little bit of space, and I plan to plant a bunch of woodies back there, and woodies, perennials, and bulbs that I can just leave there and not have to fuss with too much. Another one that I really like to grow, we have them anyways because we have a small orchard, is apple trees. Any kind of fruit tree, really. I especially like growing them for forcing in the winter. When you're in the middle of February and you haven't seen anything bloom in months except for maybe a hellebore, if you can cut a few stems off of your cherry trees or your apple trees or your stone fruit trees and get them in some water and have them bloom in your house, it feeds your soul. It feeds mine anyways. The other one would be crabapples. So along the same lines, you can force the flowers, or you can just grow them, let them bloom, and cut them while they're in season, which so many varieties are just gorgeous. And they can come anywhere from white and pink to light pinks to dark pinks and almost purples. There's a wide variety of bloom colors. The cool thing about crabapples too is that also in the fall with the little crabapples on the plant, those make really interesting bouquet ingredients in the fall. I love them, and they usually have a pretty decent fall color, though the fall color won't last very long on a stem, but they add that little element if you're doing some kind of event work or you just want it in your house. They're really beautiful, and that extra element of the crabapples on them just brings it over the top. The next one that I cut a lot of this on our property may not translate to everybody else, but we have a lot of wild cherry trees. They're called bitter cherries, I believe, and they grow everywhere. And I have no qualms about just chopping them and cutting the stems like crazy, especially on younger plants, because they will just grow back. They're basically weeds here. But they have really beautiful leaves in the spring when I don't have any of my other foliages on the plants out in the field or in any of the shrubs that I've specifically planted for that. The cherry trees make really, really good foliage in the spring for all of my bouquets with tulips and ranunculus and all of that in the early spring. I know that's a luxury that I have because they just grow wild here, but cherry trees in general make really good foliage. Another one that's always a classic and always a beauty is a lilac. And there's so many different types and varieties and flower shapes and colors. I mean, they're all in that white through dark lilac-y color, lavenders and whatnot. But there's so many different potential options for panicle size and flower size and shape and shrub or tree. You can even, some of them grow big enough to be a tree. That they're just fantastic. They only bloom for a short time in the spring, a couple of weeks maybe, but they have such a wonderful soft scent, and the color is just perfect for that time of year. I can't get enough of them. I've had a couple in my garden for years, but this last year we bought another half a dozen to plant out in the gardens, and I would love to have way more than that even. They're just fantastic, even though the window is short. I would not cut them for foliage, mostly because lilacs bloom on old wood. So the only time that you want to be cutting them is when they're blooming or right after. And then if you do it then, they will still have time to grow stems and put on buds for next year. But if you cut them other time of year, it's not going to work out, and you won't have flowers the next season. A lot of the varieties around here, though, they do a really good job of spreading underground and popping up new ones. So they kind of naturalize and you'll have more and more year over year just by planting a few. Okay, another one that I use in the spring that I love for just the short window, again, sort of like the lilacs. A lot of these flowering trees and shrubs in the spring, they only last a short window, but it's glorious for that window. I have right out here a Snowball viburnum. I have a couple different types of viburnum. I have another one that's sort of a lace cap one. I can't remember the variety, but the Snowball one, it hits at the right point of time in the season when I need some extra filler. And if you cut it at the right time and you treat it properly, cutting up the stems and letting them hydrate for a long enough time, they make beautiful bouquet ingredients, and they just look lovely. So I have one there, and they are also easy to propagate. Any of my stems that have flopped over a little bit and they were touching the ground, they actually rooted into the ground. So I have a few extra that I potted up from last year that's just from pruning the tree, and I have more Snowball viburnums now. They're great. It's worth growing. Again, the flower window for those is maybe a week or two max, and you want to cut the blooms before they fully open up when they're still sort of green. But they make a really beautiful addition to a bouquet in the spring. I also have some raspberries out in the garden. Raspberries, depending on where you live, they can get a little wild and they can want to spread. So you have to be wary of that and understand that you're going to have some maintenance with raspberries. But I have a thornless variety out there, which they say thornless, it's not completely, but the thorns are so small that they don't hurt. They're not actually prickly, really. But I have them out there, and they grow fantastic long canes that I use in the summertime when they're fully leafed out. I also use them later on a little bit in the season when they've got fruit on them. Not when the fruit is super ripe, because that'll get gross pretty quick, but when they're still sort of hard and just starting to turn color, it adds an interesting element, kind of like the crabapples. I love it. And the more you cut, it seems, the more the canes come. I have no issues cutting almost all of my raspberries and getting a full flush of them every year. They're so good. So easy to grow, especially here. I mean, we have so many wild berries from salmonberry. I actually use salmonberry in bouquets in the spring also. Salmonberry, huckleberry, blackberries. We have lots of berries. They like our climate. But raspberries, especially the thornless in particular, do really well for foliages in your bouquets. We also have some snowberry that are native here. They're a pretty good berry. I don't use a lot of it. I use it in the early spring. And they put on these cute little white berries later on in the season, which I occasionally will cut and put into bouquets, but the berries themselves don't last all that long. But the foliage is fine, small little foliage that looks really nice in a bouquet. It's not one that I use a lot of, but we have it, and occasionally I do pull because the stems look really nice. And they're, like I said, they grow wild here. They're native, so I don't have any issues with cutting them and losing them. They continue to come back every year. And then there's just a couple more like honorable mentions I don't use a lot of, but I use some. I have some mock orange, which the only reason I'm not using a lot of it yet is because my shrubs are pretty small, but over the time, they will continue to grow and they will get better and better. And the scent on a mock orange flower is just intoxicating. It's so good. I just absolutely adore it. I can't wait for these guys to grow up. They are mostly a spring bloomer. Cut a few stems, put them in some bouquets in the spring, but that's about all I'm going to use them for, not for the foliage. They're just those gorgeous, highly scented fragrant blooms in the spring. Like I said, a couple of honorable mentions, Hydrangeas, they do pretty good too. I have several Hydrangeas, different colors from reds to deep purple or deep pink that I really love, but they're a bit of a slower growing shrub for me, or it's a smaller shrub. So I don't have a lot of stems yet, but I'm looking forward to when they grow a little bit bigger and I can get more out of them. The flowers really are beautiful, and so is the foliage. You can get foliage anywhere from the sort of like the ninebark, that soft or limey chartreuse green, all the way to a deep burgundy. And then rose hips. Rose hips I put in this category too. They are, well, they're going to be most useful in your fall sort of arrangements, and even into the winter. I have some that are still on one of my my climbing roses that have big fat orange rose hips that are still there, and I might actually go cut some here to put into an arrangement. But they're fantastic, and we have a lot of wild roses around here also. The flowers aren't really useful, they're super tiny and they don't last long, but the rose hips are really great. And then smoke bush. I have one smoke bush, and I know that it would make fantastic foliage, and I've used the flowers, actually the plume, the smoke looking plumes of flowers off of them before. But for me personally, I just want to have the shrub. I don't really want to cut from it. I want it to just be beautiful. If I had a whole bunch of them, I would absolutely cut from them. And I'd treat them similar to ninebark actually, because the foliage is really dark for at least the one that I have. It would make a great foliage plant, but also those blooms, those big, smoky, airy blooms, they make really interesting, dramatic accents in larger arrangements, larger displays. They're just gorgeous. Okay, so that's my list of the majority of the woody type plants that I grow here. You can also count any evergreen really is sort of a woody type plant. You treat them the same. Most of those get used in the winter time for Christmas or winter arrangements, but they work very similarly to any of the deciduous type shrubs. And I could go on and on. There's a bunch more random little ones like salal and the wild dogwoods and the willows and all those things that we have just that grow in our woods. Again, I know that I am extremely fortunate that we have all this wild land right here on our property that I can go forage from. But the lists that I gave you are really great, just that you can go and buy the shrubs and plant them and grow them and have those woody flowers and foliages for your garden, no matter really where you live. There's some that need extra care, obviously, like the hydrangeas, but most of them will do just fine. Okay, guys, that's gonna do it for this video. I just wanted to share that. I hope that it helped some of you guys. Throughout the season, I will show you how I use all of these foliages when I'm using them. Now is not really a good time because it's middle of winter and nothing's blooming or leafed out. Yeah, I just wanted to share that with you guys. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope that you give some of these a try. And then if you liked it, leave a thumbs up. Comment what your favorites woodies are. If you have any more questions about woodies, I can talk to specific ones if you have specific questions. And then subscribe if you haven't, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye, guys.